Welcome back and thanks for joining me on yet another edition of the FC-170 wrecker build. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. I do appreciate it. Today we are going to do body work to the cab of this, and I say body work in the loosest sense of the terms, since I am not a body guy, and we're going to just leave it at that for now. So now on the body work on this thing, I kind of had to decide how far I wanted to go. With a tilt cab, every time you lift and lower the cab, there's a lot of flex. So the more Bondo, the more body filler there is, the more chance there is of stuff cracking and breaking out, especially in twisting areas. So I kind of made the decision, I'm just going to fix the big stuff. The cab corners where there's rust, the structure on the back where it's been broken apart from flexing, the area where the body mounts have to sit. Places where there are dings in the body from like where it had the old pickup bed on it, you know, a board hit the back of it, a rock hit it. I don't even care about that stuff. Driving down the road, it'll look just fine. And I don't build anything as a show vehicle. I build it so I can drive the thing and have fun with them. So that's kind of where I'm drawing the line on bodywork. That being said, my tolerance and patience for sanding lasts about 15 minutes. If I can't sand it in 15 minutes and get it ready to paint, it's going to get painted. Remember where I ended last time, showing this drawing of where I was going to cut out the rust, and it looks like I'm cutting out a little bit high, but you have to remember 6 inches up from the bottom is where all that body mount and structure is rusted out, so I needed to cut out enough so that I could access it, plate it, and re-weld it. The little side on the corner was really easy. I just cut out a piece, patched it in, welded it, ground it down, and called it good. The next step was cutting some plates out with about the right curve and then welding those into place, making sure there's enough structure for that rear body mount. Once the internal structure was done, I found some patch panels that would work. Now, you can't find patch panels for a 57 FC-170. What you can find patch panels for is a 1948 Chevy pickup. It does take a little bit of massaging to make these old pickup cab corners fit in correctly, but they do have the right shape to them. Now, you can cut that vertical seam that I left out because I'm running a piece of structure over there and won't need that seam. But once I was all welded in, ground down, had to do a little bit of epoxy feathering on the seam, but it came out pretty clean. Once I was done with the left side, it was time to move to the right side, which was far worse. I had to cut out a lot more metal. There was a lot more structure that was damaged. I had to go further up into the wheel well, kind of rebuild the body mount that would rest on the frame section. Once I had all those body mounts completed, I added a plate like I did on the other side, finished welding all of that in. Then it was time to start massaging and spot welding the patch panel back in. And I did it the same way as the other side. I welded in and filled in with as much metal as I could and a very light coat of epoxy at the end to make it nice and smooth. Back from the sandblaster, you can see the dimpling in the left front corner where this thing had been hit pretty hard at some point in time. So most of the body work was already done there. All it required was a light coat of filler and some sanding, and this corner was ready to go. The right side of the cab was in about the same shape, maybe a little bit better than the left, but that was a very thin coat and it was ready to go. The lower cab corners took a little more putty than I wanted to, but there was enough metal there, it wasn't worth replacing. On the doors where the mirrors go on both sides, there were pretty good dents and broken out pieces of metal. So I fixed those as best I could, and then I added this plate, which not only is screwed down, but epoxied to the body so that no moisture can get between it and never rust again. Plus, it supports the mirror a whole lot better than the original tin. I decided to go with a fender flare on the front because I've got a full width axle that it'll cover, plus it'll act as a step to get in and out of this thing on. Now these fenders are not round, they're kind of an oval shape. So I came up with this idea. I bought some of these tandem trailer replacement fenders, started cutting them up, and forming them in so that they would fit, and then I welded the seam together, added some structure underneath, and for the step part of it, I just ran a series of spot welds on the top. I finished off the fender flares with a little step which reinforces it down into the lower cab corner, and it not only gives it some structure, but it kind of gives it a little more finished detail. It also helps the structure of the cab a little bit. The doors gave me more trouble than anything. The left door had a nice crease in it, which I was able to push most of that out and then use some filler and fixed it. The right side was a little tougher. It had about a 6-inch crease, plus it looked like someone caved half the door in with their butt. I popped that big dent out and then filled the crease. Now what I learned later on is I should have changed something on the structure of that door, because at different temperatures that dent kind of comes back and I have to pull it back out. The teeth on a Jeep are important. That's the one thing I want to look right when you walk up and see this. And the teeth on this were in way too bad a shape for me to leave, so I did actually fix the teeth on this grill, and they came out pretty good. I think what someone had done at some point when they were transplanting that old engine in was they stuffed a cherry picker through the teeth to get the engine leveled and centered. But we're fixing those teeth now. It's like braces. You can see here how bad the teeth are on this original grill. I literally just cut all the bad teeth out and built new ones to weld in. How do you make new teeth for the grill of a Jeep? Well, I took some steel and just used a small brake, and I made this about 4 feet long, but I got as close to the profile as I could to the original teeth. Then it's just a matter of cutting them out, welding them in. Now, the front side looks really good. The back side, I actually put reinforcement ribs in, so there's really no putty in the grill. That's all metal that I spot welded in and ground out, so I didn't have to worry about any of it cracking out. And with the additional ribs in the back, it's pretty structurally strong. So I started cutting the teeth out one by one and installed the broke pieces of metal, and then continued spotting them and grinding them until they looked right. And then on the back side, I added these ribs to create a bunch of structure so that with the cab flexing, they would hold a little more rigid. And here's how they look all finished up. On the driver's side interior, I had to do a bunch of tin work, mostly to accommodate the articulating steering shaft now, which I will later cover with a shift boot. Most of the repair was done to the tunnel for the heater box when I did the tunnel for the engine cover, but I had to touch up and finish up a few things for the heater box to fit correctly. I ordered a shifter from J&B. They make a real long cable for an NP241, and I figured out I could use an old ammo box to mount it to. It's the right width and the kind of the right shape, so I cut out what I needed to and mounted it accordingly. And then I trimmed what was the top of the box so it would set in and I could weld it to that piece of structure. I had to make sure it would clear the heater and the blower motor in case I needed to service any of that. The last thing I needed to do is just trim a little piece of sheet metal and call it finished. Continuing on interior work so that I could get it ready for paint, I ran my hard brake lines and then to a soft brake lines near the hinge so that they would move when the cab was tilted. I had an electric motor kit that I bought from a guy on one of the FC sites, but I didn't have any of the mounting brackets. So a guy I met through social media who restores these sent me a picture of what the mounting brackets are supposed to look like. So I started with a flat plate, drilled the hole, started welding pieces on it so that it would look like the picture he sent me, cut a piece of channel for the motor drive, welded it together, added a Z-bar and a pivot point, and before you know it, I had a working mount that I think is going to work okay. I finished welding all the pieces together. Once I had to trim them up and kind of fine tune them a little bit. But once it was all together, it'll work just fine. I tested it in the vehicle, so now I can pull that out and I'm ready to paint the dash. Next, I had to worry about seats and how to mount them. So I figured out PRP had a really good set of bucket seats that were very narrow framed and would fit in what I had very little floor space left in this cab. So I started with some square tube and then the rails for the seats, cut and mounted the rails, mounted the seats to them. Then I set them in the vehicle and started trimming them down, shortening them and adjusting them so that I would get the right height and still be able to adjust them. Once I had everything set there, I welded the seat brackets in and then removed the sliders, obviously, to paint it. All right, the body work is as done as it's going to get on the cab because I'm all done. That's all I want to do. You know, it's decent. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. It looks a lot better 10 feet away than it does up close where you can see every flaw. And it probably looks worse to me because I know where every flaw is in it. Anyway, I'm done with the cab at this point as far as bodywork goes. Next, making the skins on the wrecker bed. Now, the skins are not anything other than just for looks. I wanted it to look traditional wrecker style, and I wanted to kind of incorporate a squared fender to kind of tie it in with that FC or Jeep truck look. So here's where I went with that. I started off with a piece of 2x2 by 1/8 inch steel, and I drilled holes and I just bolted it to some tapped holes I built in the wrecker frame. Then I started adding the structure and the shape. I made several adjustments, got a shape I liked. Once I determined I was the same on both sides and I mirrored it both sides, I pulled everything off and then completely fully welded everything. Once I had everything fully welded, I got a couple pieces of sheet metal and I just laid it on top of the sheet metal and spotted the sheet metal to the frame. After that, I just took the plasma torch and cut out all of the leftover, ground it down a little bit, and this is what I ended up with for the side skins on the wrecker. The rear fenders being next, I had some pieces of sheet metal broke into long sections. Then I cut it and hand broke it so that it was almost the identical shape of the original fender. Once I had them at the right angles, I cut out the leftover metal and spot welded that together. You can see here they're pretty close to the same shape as that original fender was. Next, I built another one so that I had a matching pair. Didn't want them to be different, wanted them to be the same. I used some tabs and bolts to mount them, and then I started adjusting them. I actually had to narrow the fender about 2 inches and then started adjusting the height where the tire would sit. When I was all happy with it, bolted them in, and this is kind of the look I was going for. Last thing to build was the dash before I go to paint. So I took the original dash and cut the top of it out, and then I cut a plate to overlay that dash. Once I had that plate ready, I figured out where I wanted the gauges and switches, cut all my gauge holes out, drilled all the holes for the switches, and then installed it to the Jeep to make sure I had everything fit correctly before I painted. That's going to do it for this video. Thank you for watching, and please like, share, and subscribe. I do appreciate it, and I will see you on the next video. Thanks.